November 18th, 2003. A man named Dennis Pinhas walks into a Californian bank and requests $200,000. He tells the clerk it's for a normal business transaction. Of course, his real name wasn't Dennis, nor was he using the cash for a normal business transaction. His real name was Popov, and he was a Ukrainian who was on a mission to purchase 8 million stolen credit cards from a hacker that stole them months prior, and had listed them for sale on Carter Planet, an eBay-like website which was a marketplace for stolen credit cards. Users could buy credit cards and even rate sellers just like any other online selling platform. But how did Popov get to this moment?
It was foretold the world would be consumed by fire and misery. The unbelievers slept untroubled. But the faithful toiled against the inevitable weighing by a terrible burden, deciding who would be spared and who would be left behind.
Popov.
Hacking in the 90s was usually just for fun, and many hackers didn't take it too seriously as the internet was still developing. But beginning in the early 2000s, hacking started to become serious. Growing up poor in Eastern Europe, Maxim Igor Popov's first experience with computers was the Ukrainian-made Poisk 1, and he would use this computer at his school. And when he was 15, his father brought home a PC, and Popov began to explore the online world. Inspired by the movie Hackers, Popov decided he would make a living online through black hatting endeavors. Around this time, there were many other hackers in the former Soviet states that were much better at coding than Popov, but Popov had a skill. Unlike his peers, Popov learned to speak fluently in English. This allowed him to socially engineer his hacks to the Western world. He then began to call Western cell phone and computer retailers to trick them into providing credit card details, and then he would cash out the credit card numbers. And around this time, local gangsters heard about Popov making money, so they began to force Popov to start giving them portions of the earnings. Popov then began to do the same thing by hacking companies to steal customers' data, and then he would contact the company and ask for money in return for not exposing the company for their data breach. And in 2000, Popov acquired the data of 54,000 credit cards from Western Union and another payment provider website based in Washington, D.C. He told the websites that he would not tell anyone what happened in return for the stolen data and offer security advice to their websites. His cost? $500,000. Both sites decided to play along and message him that they were interested, but secretly they were calling and informing the FBI on what was happening. After the FBI was informed, both websites announced the breach publicly, which destroyed Popov's mission to receive money secretly from both companies. This, and the tension from local gangsters, made Popov question if he should publicly come out to the US police to work in computer security for them. He decided it was best to come clean to the US, and later, on a cold January day, he found himself on a plane headed to the USA to meet with federal officers. Before his flight, they told Popov that they were looking forward to working with him, and that he would be a great team member. But when he arrived, he was presented with an offer of helping out the FBI against cybercriminals, or going to federal prison for his past crimes. He agreed at the time, and Popov was told to talk to his friends in Russian in chat rooms to undercover other criminals. Popov told them that he agreed to the task, but secretly, he was warning them about his capturing. And when the transcripts had been translated 3 months later, he was put in a jail cell for his previous crimes. And that's when Popov met Hilbert. Hilbert worked for the FBI, and he knew that Popov could go much further than where the FBI could go in terms of capturing criminals. Hilbert decided to work with Popov to set up targets who Popov had no loyalty to, making the relationship between him and the FBI much easier. As soon as Popov landed in his new prison closer to Hilbert's office, Popov immediately hacked into the jail library computer, making every printer in the prison print profane comments. This ended up with him going into solitary confinement almost immediately upon entry of the prison. Either way, Popov was back to hacking, and this time it was to take down hackers on Carter Planet. He started talking amongst members in chat rooms to set up deals for stolen credit cards. Popov decided to take down another user under the alias as Script. He was one of the highest ranking members on the site. They began messaging each other, and in 2 weeks, Popov set up a deal to buy $400 worth of credit cards. He continued doing this with many of the users on the site to acquire details about the site's most infamous users. Then, in 2003, one of the biggest hacks to credit cards happened. It was reported that 8 million credit cards were stolen from Data Processing International. Popov began by asking around where he could buy the cards, and then he met with a 21-year-old Russian student called Res. Res said that he knew the guys who were involved, and he would broker the deal between him and the hackers who had the card credentials. Popov decided confidently that he wanted to buy all 8 million credit cards for $200,000, but he wanted a small sample first. Res quickly turned down the offer as Popov hadn't purchased any large amounts like that before, and he would need to be able to prove that he had the funds first. Hilbert thought of an idea to go to the local bank and show the camera that he had the money and that he was eligible for the purchase. And during that sunny day in California, Popov walked into the bank and asked for $200,000. And then Res received the video with Popov with $200,000. Res then agreed to the purchase, which gave Popov and the FBI all of Res's information through the bank transfer. After over a year in jail, Popov was set free, and the government agreed that he could live nearby the FBI and he would help them. But later, in a drunken rage, Popov knocked out a man who was being aggressive with Popov. Popov then went to prison again, and after months of prison, the judge decided that he was allowed to visit Ukraine, as long as he returned in a month to serve out the remaining 3 years in jail. He then left and never returned to the States. Popov helped the FBI take down around 8 million stolen credit cards from the black market. He started his own cybersecurity company, and he was also keeping in the loop with hackers' whereabouts worldwide. He was able to realize that Russians were hacking into a pre-internet technology known as X.25. This was initially used by the government in the 70s and 80s, and it was actually still in use by the FBI. Russians were able to crawl into these old networks, and then they were able to capture the access to every agent with an FBI.gov address. The FBI paid Popov $10,000 in return for the stolen documents to be retrieved, and to stop the spread of further hacking. Popov was able to show where the stolen documents were sent, and even the leader of the hack. Sokolov was a young Russian student in St. Petersburg, and he was charged for the hack, and a warrant for his arrest was issued. And if he leaves Russia for a country that extradites to the US, he would be arrested immediately. Hilbert, who worked previously with Popov's case, was investigated for fraud and conspiracy against the government, which ended up with him losing his job. And eventually Popov had no connections to the FBI to warn anyone. Secretly though, Popov was working with Sokolov, the St. Petersburg Russian student, and the two hacked into the X.25 networks together, and then they began to start extorting companies. Along with the FBI, many other organizations and companies were using X.25 technology. One of those companies was AT&T, who Sokolov and Popov hacked. Popov and Sokolov decided to extort AT&T for $150,000. When AT&T refused to pay, the two decided to then tell the FBI about what happened, which still earned them some money. And after the falling out with Hilbert, the company EMC was hacked for its source code. Popov extorted the company, asking for $30,000 in return for not leaking the source code, and EMC agreed. And they even agreed to pay another $40,000 in 4 years had he not leaked the source code. And then 4 years later, Popov requested $40,000 from the company. EMC refused to pay him, and the company argued that he probably never even stole the source code and he couldn't do anything with it. And eventually, the first 520 lines of code appeared on the web. The company had to do serious damage control, but by the time the code was released, the company patched all possible holes. Hilbert and Popov were able to delve into the world of stolen credit cards and take down some of the most prolific users on the site. Popov has been making a living being the FBI's best friend and worst nightmare, and to this day, he's still conducting hacks.